Hello, and welcome to Tales Under the Cat Tree. My name is Dileepa Vijayawardena, better known as Dupes. In this podcast, we're going to explore the wonderful worlds created by words on paper, from technology and the future to fiction and other realms. If you want to get to know me and find out who I am, you can listen to episode number 1, where I attempt to put you to sleep with all the gory details. Please remember that all my writing is available on my Substack at tales.dupes.ca, including the articles that make up this episode. If you enjoy this or any of my writing, please do subscribe to either this podcast or the Substack, where I hope to bring you articles, stories, and podcasts regularly. Thank you very much. So this is episode number 3 for the week of May 18th, 2025. You might have noticed that this episode started out with some music. That's the first ever public music composition I have ever created, certainly the first ever theme song. I decided to try and evoke some old 80s sitcom themes, so hopefully I was successful. It's a rough cut. It will likely be dumped, recreated, or made better. But your opinion matters, and if you have anything to say about this, please drop me a line through tales.dupes.ca. I'll play it again at the end in all its full glory and talk about all of that. This episode is a second part of episode number 2. So if you haven't listened to that, I would go have a listen about whether software developers at larger software development teams are actually embracing or trying out agentic AI coding tools. This episode is much more about history and some thoughts on where we might be headed. Yes, I will throw my hat into future prognostication. After all, what we imagine is what we end up creating, and we are all part of writing our own future. But do remember, we evolve through fits and spurts, driven by our society, our cultures, and our individual and collective histories. And I briefly touched last week on where we have come from in technology. So in this episode, let me use the many faces of my personal website, dupes.ca or dileepa.com, as the scarecrow or the motivation to tell and trace 30 years of internet history. When internet old-timers talk about the past, I sometimes feel I'm listening to grandparents telling us they walked to school uphill both ways, barefoot through blizzards. It is insane how much has changed in such a short time. Last week, I was considering what I see as a reality today, where I'm seeing resistance, reluctance, or hesitation in the software development world to try new technologies, especially around agentic AI at work. Many times, I see developers hiding their head in the sand and occasionally popping out to yell things like, "Rust is king, Kubernetes for the win." Of course, I had a thought that, as usual, there's nothing really new here. So let me for a bit talk about being an old-timer. Unfortunately, I cannot beam images into your mind just yet. So if you want to see images of the sites I'm talking about or links to anything, please visit the show notes and the article on my Substack at tales.dupes.ca. I was involved with the internet from the moment I set foot in Memorial University of Newfoundland in St. John's on the extreme east end of Canada. This was the beginning of the 1990s. Grunge was king, and Nine Inch Nails was often in my cassette and CD playlists. Primarily, I needed the internet because I wanted to communicate with my father in Hong Kong, where I had grown up, through this invention called email. Yep, I kid you not. He dictated emails to his secretary, who then sent them along to me. The other reasons were because of the student newspaper, which was called The Muse, and my love of role-playing games. If you recall Usenet, you would have recalled also comp.sys.ibm.pc.games.rpg, where I pretty much lived. In 1993, we put The Muse on Gopher. This was one of the predecessors to the World Wide Web. Before many major newspapers, our student newspaper was publishing weekly on the internet. I remember a conversation where one computer science staff member said to me, "This mosaic thing won't take off. Who really cares if pictures are embedded along with the text?" Now, Gopher, that's the future. In 2025, some 30 years later, I find myself relaunching my writing and photos online. This time, I'm using the nascent squirrel-sized brains of today's large language models and agentic AI. With that in mind, let me take you through the iterations of dupes.ca, delipa.com, and photos.dupes.ca. I'll use these as a way to talk about some of the learnings around the cyclical nature of technology and why you might as well embrace the changes around us. Technology creates new roads that we can run down, ruthlessly eats its own creators, and spits out new economies of scale in relatively short time periods. My first ever personal website was called The Illusionist Wardrobe. This was all before domains like dupes.ca or delipa.com. Those didn't exist yet. And it existed on my university's so-called Morgan Unix system. By this point in time, I could navigate my way around VI, and I disliked Pico, another editor. And if you want to talk about nerd religious warfare, this is definitely one of them. The beginning of the web was way more annoying than any other thing. I remember hand-drawing images, making background tiles, and coloring the scans in Photoshop 2.5, which had no layers. There was no CSS, so you had to piece all of these together using HTML tables. But it worked. I do still think this site was one of the more fun that I've ever had on the internet. Everyone was experimenting at this point. We had loud discussions about online advertising and what that might mean in the future. Every day, more and more people went online. Every day, there were new technologies and ideas. There was no YouTube, no Wikipedia, and definitely no Google. Learning meant trying, experimenting, figuring out the hacks. HTML tables weren't designed to put images together. HTML tables were designed to display tabular information. The hack of putting pieces of images into tables with zero padding actually worked, and so born were complex web designs. The web was not the domain of professional programmers. Those people were writing C and C++ on real programs, at least in my mind. The web was the domain of people like me, the hacks, and this was the domain of the inferior programmer. For us hacks, finding the gray areas, the in-between states, the shortcuts allowed us to succeed. We had to think outside of the box. This is a learning that one should take away for today. Many professional programmers over the next decade were dragged onto web technologies. Many were unlikely to have done it on their own terms. Those professional programmers who had so scoffed at PHP programmers suddenly found they were working on complex projects at Facebook using, of all things, PHP. Fast forward another decade, and between 2000 and 2012, I built sites labeled The Cat's Eyes, which featured pictures of my then cat. There's, yes, a pretty big feline theme about my web presence. These sites were built during my times at BioWare Corporation and the database company MySQL, and also the company that I helped to found, Empire Avenue. The web was expanding into much of what we know today. At first, we were running on what we called LAMP stacks, which stands for Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP, Python, Perl, what have you. If you were a competent web programmer, you needed to know all of those in some detail. Server-side code was king, and CSS was becoming better and better. The browsers were improving, but nowhere near to the level that they are today. The first cat's eye was almost entirely PHP, HTML, and some basic JavaScript. I had coded my own forum system from scratch. I can't remember why, but I would go on to repeat that feat on a grander scale with various applications at BioWare. If you were a web programmer in those days, you were optimizing everything. You were delving into Apache configs, screwing around on databases, learning networking, understanding what not to do with things like SQL injections. This was also the rise of the web frameworks. More and more programmers joined the workforce who did not know the internals of how a database actually work, let alone a CPU or memory. Frameworks like Zend and Cake and others would handle all of that for you, in spectacularly bad fashion at first, but of course improving as they went on. Around this time, open source truly started to eat the world. If there was some software you needed, from operating systems to low-level libraries, someone had created and opened it up for you. A fun fact for any geek, BioWare launched Neverwinter Nights with an alpha version of MySQL 4.0. In many ways, I believe the next few years will be more like this period. Those like me who had been the hacks of the late 90s suddenly found our places as so-called experts, realizing our dream applications and companies and doing it faster and cheaper and at scale. The counter was that the systems we were building abstracted away much of the complexity. New breeds of programmers and designers could now be more effective with their time, even if it came at the cost of hiding the inner workings of systems and increasing hidden costs in servers, performance, and even human resources. The next stage of evolution for my personal website was, well, to not code my own site at all. I had asked myself why. This was the rise of software as a service, after all. It meant that I could host my photos somewhere like SmugMug for $10 a month, the same amount I would have to pay for hosting. During this same period, the hyperscalers like Amazon Web Services, AWS, and Google Cloud Platform, GCP, they rose to become the behemoths that they are today. Empire Avenue, for example, moved from actual hardware at Rackspace to Google Cloud Platform on virtual machines sometime around 2012. In addition, social media was absolutely here to stay. There was little point for me to publish my writing on my personal blog. I needed to use platforms like WordPress and Medium and others if I wanted to have any reach or visibility. They were also easier. As a web programmer, now a tech leader, my focus was on having applications work on mobile. Every week, it felt like there was a new JavaScript framework, Angular, React, followed by Node and TypeScript, just to name a few. Every school was suddenly churning out JavaScript and Python programmers. So many were joining the workforce. These people, for the most part, were even further abstracted away from the underlying systems. You didn't need to know Linux anymore. And who cared about the web server? In fact, if you need to develop something, simply use a library through Node. Even today, the 1,000 packages and dependencies that are installed on a simple web app is mind-blowing. I doubt many, if any, know all the different dependencies and what they do. The browser became an operating system all on its own. Developers could prototype fast, put a service up on a hyperscaler like Google with a serverless function, and away you went. Note, there is always a server somewhere. You just don't see it or control it. That, of course, leads us to more recent history. In 2022, I finally coded another website, and this one was called This Is Our Life, No Dress Rehearsal. These are lines from a Tragically Hip song. This was after a decade of nearly no personal web presence. I programmed the site over a couple of weeks during a cold, dark Christmas in Helsinki. I wanted to learn Next.js and go back to having some sense of control over my web presence. To make it easy, I ensured that individual galleries were in Markdown, and I used another design framework called Chakra. I coded this from scratch, but I never finished it. It was annoying to have to maintain it. Every time I came to update the site, I had to remember the code, get the context again, fix deprecated libraries, and then maybe, just maybe, I added to it. What seemed like a good idea felt like a weight around my personal time. And did I learn Next.js through this? Yes, of course. I went through the docs, I wrote the code, I deployed to Vercel, and I shamelessly copied code from Stack Overflow when I needed to. The only difference between now and then was that it took longer and I had to do a lot more searches on Google. So now we come to the latest iteration, which was coded in under 5 hours, with Claude Code and Ada with Gemini 2.5 Pro. Finally, I have a site which, for me, is mostly finished. I can concentrate on getting my galleries back up. Some of the photos haven't been online in 20 years. In a matter of minutes, I was able to get a map with my gallery locations. In some more minutes, I had translated the old files to the new format, all done with some clever prompting. Better yet, I now know that maintaining this will come through talking to my coding assistant. The process wasn't all rosy. I did accidentally spend $10 by giving a circular prompt around some testing. I also thought that it had created a bug, but actually my prompt had inadvertently caused a feature that I actually liked, but one I did not expect. I read through the code and even learned some new stuff about Astro, which is a technology that I had decided to use. I do understand that in the hands of someone less knowledgeable, this is yet another abstraction layer that hides the complexity of what it means to run a web application. So what have I actually learned over 30 years on the internet? Well, looking back, I can see that every decade and every layer of software improvement has created levels of abstraction from the underlying hardware and even deeper software. We are moving further and further towards an outcome-based reality in working with computers. Programming was, after all, never meant to be the end state in this journey. The vast majority of programming languages have been created so we humans can understand how to instruct both the silicon and each other. The truth is, if there were ways to get computers to produce the outputs we want with our programming, we would and we will. I foresee a future where someone develops an even more straightforward interface that allows AI models to write machine code directly. I foresee way more economies of scale due to different groups of people being enabled in creating software and applications. The more diverse the population creating applications, the more amazing our lives will become. However, I also foresee we need to not make the mistakes of the past. Every abstraction does come with dangers, including security and privacy issues. And we, the so-called experts of today, can definitely help in this arena. Regardless, today, I'm happy that I can concentrate again on my writing and photos and less on technology. Today, I'm happy in the knowledge that I control my web presence on my terms. Today, I can see how agentic AI could be a brighter future for most programmers out there. This story is just barely getting started. Like in the late 1990s and in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, I again feel like that hack trying to make sense of it all while my teams are already running ahead of me, releasing the next big idea. Today, if someone were to ask me what to study in university, I would say absolutely learn everything you can if you are going out to become a programmer, to be a programmer. Learn all the things, the underlying technologies, the way computers work and everything else. But I would also do lots of humanities. I would try and understand how the world works, the philosophy, the history, the societies, the cultures that make up planet Earth. And I think with that, we will be able to create incredible new applications that will stand the test of time, help people, and actually drive our society towards greater and greater success. Thank you for listening to this episode. At the beginning, I mentioned that I would talk about composing the theme to a podcast, something I have never ever done before. A few people suggested I use AI for this, but then I thought perhaps I should first understand the concepts rather than layering in an abstraction layer to something I didn't really have a clue about. After all, I should heed my own advice, right? So this is where I started. Here's a transformation from the initial piano play that I did. Which I then changed to the following with some synth work. Well, is this anywhere good? I don't know. You tell me. I was already told, yeah, it's okay. Has a ways to go. Well, that's the point of learning and growing. I hope you will grow with me. Some final thoughts. I had to go hunt around the web archive in the Wayback Machine. It is remarkable how much of the internet has already disappeared. I was shocked to find articles and posts that I had never saved anywhere. One even brought a tear to my eye as it recounted the days that a dear friend collapsed at work and I was at the hospital. We all know that we can't remember our childhoods as clearly as we would like. Somehow, though, I had sort of assumed my online life would be a second or tertiary memory. As pages continually disappear, I fear that we are losing a small bit of our collective memory, and therefore collected learnings and wisdom. The Wayback Machine and the Internet Archive deserve our thanks and our donations. Thank you very much. In fact, I have made a donation as part of this episode. What do you think of this episode? Do you also have a personal website like me that you've been shepherding forward like I have? Do you agree on where we are going? I would love to hear from you. You can reach me through email, contact@dupes.ca, bluesky@dupes.ca, or on my site and this post at tales.dupes.ca. Remember to subscribe so I can get to know you better and learn from you. Thank you for listening to Tales Under the Cat Tree. Next week, I'm going to take you on a journey through the Atacama Desert, through volcanoes in Chile, and through the mad, congested streets of Colombo, Sri Lanka. So please join me next week for Tales Under the Cat Tree.